Hi and welcome to Stephan Livera podcast, a show about Bitcoin. So right now I'm in Austin, Texas. So I'm excited to be back in Texas here for some events, and obviously I'll be over in Dallas next week for BitBlock Boom. So I'm looking forward to seeing those of you listeners out there. And today, for episode 301, we're talking about Bitcoin mining pools and whether they should be decentralized or whether they can be decentralized. So joining me is Pavel Moravec of SlushPool and Braiins, and then also Ryan Ellis of Laurentia, and we talk about various concepts like why pools exist, how they are structured, some of the trade-offs, what do Coinbase payouts look like versus other methods, lightning payouts, and scalability for mining pools. This show is brought to you by Swan Bitcoin, and as you know, I recently joined the team at Swan Bitcoin. Swan helps you accumulate Bitcoin with automatic recurring buys and instant buys. It's a really fast setup and cheap to automate your stacking. Swan has a service called Swan Private, and this one is for high net worth individuals all over the world, corporates, businesses, trusts, even self-directed IRAs. All of these entities can be onboarded to purchase Bitcoin. So if you want some direct access to a Bitcoin account expert who's available for one-on-one calls, so if you're interested, go to swanbitcoin.com and click private at the top, complete the form there, and the team will get in touch. Now, if you're interested in the idea of Bitcoin DeFi Lend, at HODL HODL is a peer-to-peer Bitcoin-backed lending platform. So, if you have stablecoins, you can lend them out, you can earn extra income. On the other hand, if you have Bitcoin and you need some fiat liquidity, well, you can collateralize against your Bitcoin, and this can be done globally and anonymously. There's no KYC. So, in this way, without selling your Bitcoin, you can still get some fiat liquidity. The best thing is you can still hold one key in the 2 of 3 multi-signature, so you know there is no rehypothecation, and HODL HODL does not hold your funds. This is peer-to-peer lending and borrowing directly between users. So with the platform, you set your terms and put up offers depending on how long you want to borrow or lend and the interest rate. Go to lend.hodlhodl.com. Bitcoin mining is a very attractive proposition right now. If you are interested, Compass Mining can help you get set up. They've got all kinds of different deals and equipment available that you can go there to purchase. So you can go and select an ASIC and have that sent to a hosting facility that has already been vetted by the team at Compass Mining. And then you can select your mining pool and you will then receive Bitcoin. So there's a whole range of different ways to get involved. There are bundle options also for those of you interested. And in doing so, you can access industrial power rates and cheaper hardware rates as well, as opposed to what you might pay just as a retail or residential individual. So go to compassmining.io and sign up to start mining Bitcoin today. Now onto the show with Pavel and Ryan. So Pavel and Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks.
So Pavel, I think people know you pretty well. You've been on the show a couple of times. Ryan, did you want to just introduce yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, my name is Ryan Ellis. I'm owner of minefarmbuy.com and laurentiapool.org. I guess co-operator of Laurentia.
Great. And any details there in terms of your background, or at least what you're comfortable to share?
Just a lot of logistics background, sales, of course, and
Yeah, and so Pavel, maybe just for listeners who aren't familiar with you, can you just give us a bit of a background on yourself as well?
Yeah, I have mostly computer science programming background, but lately I do spend most of my time trying to run the company, which is like Braiins, obviously. But yeah, it's a completely different position for me, learning a lot of stuff. But I try to be as close to the tech and programming as I can. We do run a SlushPool. We do have this different branch in the company building mining firmware, Braiins Plus, trying to do other R&D stuff in mining space, especially Bitcoin mining space. So yeah, busy in this area.
Gotcha. Yeah. So the reason we wanted to have a discussion, and I think there was sort of, is it a debate? Is it a discussion? I think we're a little bit more on the discussion side, but there's been some discussion about this idea of should mining pools and should mining in general be further decentralized, and what ways are feasible for it to decentralize. So perhaps we could start a little bit of how we got here. Maybe Pavel, you could help us explain, why did mining pools even start in the first place? Why is that even a thing?
Yeah, it is pretty easy idea, right? If you're trying to mine Bitcoin, your chance of doing so successfully is pretty low if you don't have a large enough share in the whole hash rate market, let's say. So the pool solves the problem of you not getting rewards frequently enough, basically spreading variance and helping you get money very often, even though you don't have to be the one lucky to find a new block. So it's a group of people joining forces together to mine blocks.
Yeah, and so I guess just for listeners, if you're totally new, let's say if you were to just buy one ASIC machine and plug it in, you might be waiting in a very long time if you were just trying to solo mine, let's say. And so that's part of the reason why the idea with pools, as Pavel was just explaining, you can think of it like it's smoothing out the rewards for you so that you can get a more consistent payouts. Now, Ryan, I want to bring you in. I want to get your thoughts on this idea. Do you agree or disagree with Pavel there, or how would you want to discuss this idea of mining pools?
Well, as far as pooled mining, it's really, in my opinion, essential. So I don't see any disagreement there at all. With regards to a single ASIC, yeah, your reward cadence is very sparse, if that makes sense. I think a new ASIC, even, the latest gen, probably net you a block fine within about 15,000 days, maybe less, 13,000 days. So pooled mining is sort of, the atmosphere we're in, not necessarily by choice, but by necessity.
Gotcha. And so then I think the question then is more about how should those pools work, how should they be formed, and how should the payouts be done? Because I think that's where maybe some of the disagreement might lie. So Ryan, do you want to spell out where your disagreement is?
Well, essentially, any pool operator can, operate their pool the way they would like. I don't see, much argument in that regard. I'm not going to tell, Pavel and Slush, how to do things, so to speak. So when we get sort of further into decentralization and maybe topics like that, we, might have butt heads a little bit or a lot of it. I guess we'll find out. But as far as Laurentia pool, really just the model is self-custody for miners. It's definitely not a pool designed for your small sort of home mining community. As much as I would like to be more inclusive, still the risks involved, when you are mining scores like ours, SPLNS, and then I think Slush is on PPLNS, and you can correct me if I'm wrong there. But those are really models and scores driven around actual network mining versus, sort of your flat rate PPS score systems. And it's operation wise, we're looking at, for us with our Coinbase derived reward, we're limited by firmware to a small user group. And that's where we sort of utilize that to hopefully captivate industrial and enterprise miners.
I see. So Ryan, could you just spell out for listeners, how is Laurentia pool different from most of the other mining pools out there? What's the differentiating factor there?
Well, I think there may be another pool that operates as far as the Coinbase derived payout, but that is the biggest catalyst there is receiving your mining reward directly from the network and reducing any intermediaries, focusing on self-custody and ownership was just very important to me to, collaborate with Khan and deliver, something to market that we thought would be of high interest.
I see. And Con is your partner in the mining operation or in the operation of Laurentia pool?
Yeah, Khan has been around a while. I'm not going to really speak for him, I guess, so to speak. He was co-author, CG Miner originally. He's had his own pools, CK Pool, CK Solo, and all, based around more of your sort of private and direct payout, so non-custodial environments.
I see. And so perhaps it's time to go back to Pavel and get your explanation. How does SlushPool do mining and then the mining payouts? If you could just outline a little bit of that process.
Yeah. what a pool typically does is, as we discussed, it groups other people's hash rate, and then when a block is found, it is typically found to an address controlled by a pool operator. During the mining process, a lot of data is collected about the performance of various miners, and based on the hash rate provided to the group, to the pool, the miners are rewarded certain portion of the found block. There are different scoring systems how you can calculate what you deserve based on your hash rate and time and some other various scenarios, but mostly every scoring system tries to somehow be the correct one or be right. Once there is amount you deserve known, the pool creates a transaction and sends the money to you. There are various mechanisms how to prevent transaction dust and how not to send you too many transactions, because you would have to, for example, pay a lot of fees for using a lot of outputs and so on. So typically, a miner can set up rules in what time, what frequency, what amounts the payout should be done. So on SlushPool, for example, you can say, hey, I want payouts when I mined 0.1 Bitcoin, and then send it to me, or do it daily, or some other options, which gives you the Bitcoins in more concise transaction outputs, basically. There is obviously a drawback in it, which is the pool operator can hold the coins which you're deserving for some time. For bigger miners, it can be, and for example, in SlushPool case, it can be within an hour or hour and something, and you can send it to you whenever there is a block found, your reward is big enough, and the transaction can go out because it's substantial. In case of small miners, and it is still vast majority of our miners, it can take weeks, even months, before there is a reasonable amount for being paid out. And obviously there is some risk associated with it, but it is a way how to prevent some technical issues with very small transactions.
Excellent. So, put it in other words, it's essentially that because, the miner, I guess the crucial difference here is in that sense, SlushPool is custodial for a small period of time, or in the case of a small miner, it might be for a longer period of time until they've had enough to reach that threshold, until they actually get the payout. So I guess that's probably the key difference that I'm understanding. You guys correct me if I'm wrong there. And so I guess another interesting question people might be thinking is, and you mentioned, sorry, go on, Ryan.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to interject. So our Coinbase Drive payout, it's scored weighted on share quality, quantity, and then at every block find, it is dispersed to each miner individually at the Coinbase level.
I see. Yeah. And so that's part of that trade-off, which we'll get to. And perhaps, Pavel, if you could just explain the part around why you want to prevent dust. Why is preventing dust a good idea?
Every transaction has some resources associated with it. If you want to send a Bitcoin transaction, it needs to be put into a blockchain. Let's not discuss some layer 2 payout schemes, which are completely outside of this things. We investigated this before, but it's a completely different story, right? So if you want to put the payout on directly to the blockchain, it has some cost. It takes block space, and so you don't want to be allocating the space for very small amounts, because otherwise nobody would be able to basically send a transaction, and the fees would go through the roof. And transaction fees associated with the payout could be easily of the size of the payout itself. So you want to prevent this, and as a pool operator, you need to consider the cost associated with sending the coins, because it is either direct, as every custodial pool operator knows, or indirect in terms of reserving space in Coinbase address, because the bytes in blocks are just bytes in blocks and they are limited. So sending very small transactions has associated price or cost
with it. Yeah. And essentially that it could be bad as well from the perspective of the person receiving lots of small amounts of coins, UTXOs, because then later when they go to spend it again, it's going to be very costly for them. And so that can be quite a costly and maybe not as scalable approach. But I'm wondering as well, Ryan, what's your philosophy and thinking on that? And are you essentially getting around that by saying it should only be for larger miners who are doing the Laurentia pool approach, or do you have a different answer on that idea?
Well, as far as dust, I mean, there's really no argument there. Essentially, using block space efficiently is, I think, critical. So sending a dust transaction is really can be impossible depending on your sats per byte, so to speak.
Yeah.
With Laurentia pool and I guess since we're limited to including the pool fee to 20 Coinbase derived payouts or techs. So those will be issued by the blockchain and available within 100 confirmations as is standard for the network. And as far as having the limit to our pool, we're likely not to receive, or a user or miner is likely not to receive a dust payout based on the breakdown. But again,
may I have a question to you, because I'm not sure if I understand how exactly your pool is operating. So you somehow limit the amount of outputs you're putting into the Coinbase, so to prevent dust, for example.
No, essentially firmware is the limit. So ASIC firmware, I guess, depending on manufacturer, will vary with the ability to put out multiple Coinbase transactions. And that's sort of the position we're in. So a few years ago, Khan had his own sort of group pool, not a solo pool. And you would literally see postponed payments, which would be your dust payments on his pool there. So with our pool, there's not enough user count to attribute dust unless there was maybe a very small miner contributing to the pool against a larger set of, I guess, more robust industrial or enterprise miners.
Why do you think is the case that the firmware is preventing this scheme? Because we kind of know something about firmware, but we definitely not know all the details of how stock firmware, for example, works. But firmware typically doesn't have any idea about number of outputs in Coinbase because it's not available information to the miners, right?
Yeah, so as far as the developers, I guess, changing the code I guess the argument would be to make it more efficient, but in that regard limits, pools such as Laurentia pool, Khan's prior grouped pool, with allowing these ASICs to participate on their pools with multiple Coinbase techs.
So Ryan, are you able to comment are there any in particular that you could name, or is it a general comment?
Well, the biggest bottleneck right now happens to be Antminer, so being one of the more popular manufacturers, and they're the catalyst to our limit in our Coinbase output. So with Antminer, we're only allowed 20 techs. So 2 are reserved for our pool operators, myself and Khan, and then we have 18 open for users or miners.
As in there are 18 potential pool users after accounting for yourself and Khan?
Correct, yeah. So with that, as far as block space, we're not really looking at pulling away a lot of sort of size for such a small group. So as far as reward or not filling our blocks completely, we, like most pools, I imagine, take the highest fees possible. So whether that's a small transaction with a high fee or a large transaction with a low fee, but obviously larger in size because of the quantity of coins being moved, we're still able to compete as far as a complete network block subsidy with other pools.
Yeah, I think it's pretty common that miners are understandably motivated to include as many transactions as possible, or the optimization function is get as much transaction fees into the block as possible so that the payouts will be the largest. It's a pretty common strategy, and I don't imagine there is economically motivated miner not doing this, which probably most of the miners are, right? Maybe one comment to the firmware limitation. I don't think it is intentional myself. We did study a lot of available code bases for firmwares before, because obviously you try to get as much information as possible. And it is just stupid firmware. It's just stupid code with buffers predetermined before. And the Coinbase transaction is just sent as random bytes or opaque bytes. There is no parsing in it needed for the firmware. It's just give me a bunch of bytes, then some space you can play with to mine more efficiently, and then other bunch of bytes. And this is sent to the firmware every single time when a new job is offered by the pool, which is roughly every minute, every 30 seconds. And all these bytes are just smashed together, put some random nonce in it, and mined. And the firmware obviously needs to do some byte manipulation. And the limitation, in my opinion, is just based on assumption that the Coinbase transaction has some maximum size. And the assumption in the firmware is probably not correct, because valid transaction in Bitcoin, there are some limitations which are hard, but the buffers in firmware are just not big enough for it. And we can speculate, obviously, about is it intentional or is it just crappy software? And my strong opinion would be, it's just crappy software, because all the rest of the code base is basically, put a monkey behind the computer, and once it's doing something, it just let's release it, and it works, so that we will copy it to the next generation, and next generation. And unfortunately, in case of pools who try to do these things, they are obviously hit by this limitation, which is sad, but because the transaction can be in principle larger, but unfortunately it cannot be easily done or forced to the miners.
Well, I think intentional is probably a correct term. I don't know. I wouldn't say, I mean, you could speculate if it is sort of disingenuous or, as like an attack on Bitcoin. I don't know if I would go that far, but most of the operators or ASIC manufacturers operate their own pools, and sort of the consensus is in the pooled environment is typically a single, maybe multiple in two Coinbase payouts to the pool. So seeing larger than that is probably just deemed as non-essential, and that's sort of mostly my light interpretation of why these changes have taken place.
Maybe I have a solution for you. I just thought about limitation right now, and you could do a trick like this. You can put one output to the Coinbase and keep it very small to some address you control, and to the same block immediately after the Coinbase, you can put any number of payout transactions as you wish. So you would decompose the first transaction immediately in the same block, and then you can just use all the transaction space in the block and never hit the problem of like too large Coinbase transaction. And you would not even discuss or show, but the problem then is the people will not see the transactions directly or the miners, but all your blocks will be visible after that. So you could sidestep the problem of Coinbase size limitation and not do any custodial thing if we don't understand the one transaction moves to address A, and immediately after that, A moves to one payout, A moves to second payout. This is slightly more complicated on the server side, but still doable. And maybe you could then support more than 18 users this way. Because in principle, I kind of like the idea of not holding the coins for longer period of time, but there are very strong technical limitations associated with it, and not all the miners really need it or want it. But there is some space or some people who can have this preference, and it's great if there is some offering for them. But maybe you could try this thing. I don't see why it should not work, but maybe I'm missing something.
Yeah, I'm not. Khan would be the more technical person to have and sort of discuss a lot of those characteristics, being so familiar, obviously, with the code he's developed. So I think with us and having a Coinbase transaction, again, derived from the block reward is just probably the easiest solution to deliver sort of, I guess, the product that we are looking to, bring to market as far as self-custody and direct payments without any intermediary sort of custodial solutions, which also helps us as far as, managing our own organization. So we don't have to manage payouts after the fact. Everything is done to score and then at block find.
Yeah, but you kind of have to, because somebody has to define how the Coinbase transaction should look like. So you are actually generating the Coinbase transaction to the block. So you are doing the payouts, but the obvious pros for the miner is the coins are never controlled by you once they are mined, but the outputs are still generated by your system. So you are doing the payouts in some way. So
the scoring, absolutely.
Yeah. And so, Ryan, if I could ask then, is the idea then with the Laurentia pool, is the idea that you're just openly saying we'll just have a smaller pool in terms of number of users, and in doing so, we'll be non-custodial? And that's one of the trade-offs. You're like, you get what I'm saying? Like, you're custodial for less time because you just get that direct payout. But the trade-off is you just can't have as many users on the pool as compared to, let's say, SlushPool, which could have many, many more users, right?
Correct, yeah. So again, in the past, Khan was able to have thousands of users on his group pool before the firmware changes, by that specific manufacturer we mentioned. And it's disappointing, but for me, as far as operational side, it actually makes my job a lot easier to manage a smaller group. So I'm not going to complain too much about it. But
lucky you.
yeah, absolutely. Besides, having to field the constant inquiries on, bringing in their 100 terahertz, ASIC, and, when they expect to pay out. So us having the password and having our server locked is sort of to alleviate that issue at the gate. It kind of sucks to be a gatekeeper in that aspect, because it would be nice to have an open pool that people could join in and join out sort of freely, but that poses more problems as far as keeping rewards consistent for the group as well. So for me, operationally, it's streamlined, and then we're able to secure our server. And as far as getting, I guess when we do finally get a hash rate on there at a cadence that all the users or peers are willing to accept, then.
So Ryan, can I ask then, are you proposing this idea that more and more people should be using this kind of model, or do you just see it like this is a niche model? Like, I guess the question I'm asking is, how do you see this idea scaling to more and more people if each time you run this kind of pool, it's maximum of 20 people?
Well, it kind of goes to our philosophy of pool dispersion. So I'm sort of in the mindset that decentralization in a pool environment is sort of unachievable, because you're looking at, centralized servers, maybe outside a P2 pool. And that's, for us, we can spin up a server, in Australia, we can put one up in EU, and sort of have segregated groups if there's demand for it. So if we, find this successful and people want, sort of, I guess, quote, this product, unquote, we're happy to, deliver that and continue to.
Yeah, but then there is a like inherent problem in pool mining and decentralization, because the whole key point of pool is working as a group to limit the variance. So we can try to like cut the problem into several pieces, but there are basically two sides of the centralization problem. One is money handling. Who controls the coins and how, and can we double check it, and can we prevent some like issues related to money handling? To a certain extent, this is solved by payouts in the Coinbase, but you can argue that the centralized server, still makes the decision about who gets the coins. You can maybe slightly faster detect some possible fraud, but normally there's not so much problems related with not getting money out of pool.
Yeah.
So this is one part which is centralized. Who pays and who controls the coins in any way? And the second part is who decides what block is being mined, right? Who chooses the transactions in the block? Who constructs the block as a new candidate for extending the whole blockchain? And this is arguably the more important part of the whole centralization decentralization topic, because like how miners are being paid for the work is like transitional thing. It's a momentary thing. Once they are paid, it's over. uh, but the blockchain as a set of blocks and transactions, whatever, it's just being kept for a very long time, and preventing somebody using the blockchain infrastructure, for example, by transaction censoring or things like that, it has direct impact to the whole ecosystem. It's not like mining problem where me as a miner and you as a pool, we have an agreement that you are paying me properly, and we can sort this out by some whatever agreement we make, and I can enforce it, maybe even by law or whatever. This is pretty like it's just part of the mining industry. It doesn't expand to the whole Bitcoin space so much, but the block selection or transaction selection is influences the whole Bitcoin space, or at least much more than the first part. And it is even bigger problem and even more complicated problem to solve, because it goes directly against we are behaving as one miner together in a pool. And once we want to address the second problem of choosing the transactions being mined on, then it can be done, but it's technically even more complicated than handling the money part. And this is something what we investigated in Stratum V2 protocol, which doesn't address the money part because we don't think it's a crucial thing, and it has so many technical problems which are not worth like working on, because it just works even today, we think. But the block construction or transaction selection part is not addressed at all by any solution we are aware of which would be usable. And yeah, I'm not claiming it's a perfect ideal solution which we proposed in V2, but still it's the best effort we are aware of.
I think
And it's addressed. Yeah,
I
go
think
ahead.
for Stratum V2, I can agree that it helps with that decentralization of the text selection. But still, again, I think the point where you are collaborating with a pool, still the miners with the highest hash rate are going to have the probability in their favor to have their templates, propagated to the chain. So that still in itself is a little centralized, but it's still definitely in my opinion, a good move away from pools who like shadow mine and do very, I think, devious things like that in the pooled environment that we see.
Yeah, sure. But the in ideal world, when all miners are using Certain V2, which I would like to see sometime, but I don't think it will happen in so broadly or whatever. In the ideal world, when everybody would use transaction selection and V2, then the block distribution would be the same as if everybody is solo mining. So I cannot imagine being in better. If somebody has a huge data center full of ASICs and he solo mines, then obviously he would have larger influence on what blocks will be mined. It's pretty direct. There is no way around that. And nobody wants to change it, I think, because it's just your right to choose whatever you want to mine on, because you have the hardware, you made the investment, make your decision. And so by using V2, we could get as close as possible to this ideal, but still being able to solve the money distribution problem and variance smoothing problem, as we discussed before, on the money side, paid by some level of centralization, because somebody is providing the service of smoothing the variance. But it's a trade-off, obviously.
That's where scores like PPS, sort of attract miners as well. So getting a sort of flat fee for your hash looks, in my opinion, good on paper, but again, over time, all block rewards should really even out. And with accelerated fees on pools that run PPS, maybe there's some backdoor deals or whatever, but they're essentially, miners are losing revenue over the course of a long period of time for that short-term stability.
So can we just dive into that a little bit? Like, what is it sounds to me like you have a fundamental disagreement with the way points per share works. What's your issue with that, and what's the alternative that you're proposing?
Well, I think the alternative, it's really what we're doing with Laurentia Pool. And I think I made the point that a miner has the ability to choose. So that to me is more important than anything else, having that ability to look at, all the pools in the ecosystem and deciding, what they're after specifically. So as far as myself and my interpretation of, points per share being less ideal over time, really just my interpretation of, scoring and pool mining. So for me, I would prefer...
Could we just dive into that a little bit further? You're saying it's your interpretation of the scoring. So what is it about the scoring of PPS that you don't like? Just so we can try to understand, where is the actual disagreement here?
Well, there's a lot of things a pool can do with your hash rate. So if they are just offering you points per share, you might not necessarily know what chain you're mining at any given time. Granted, I think there's more transparency with pools than others, and some people do prefer to sort of profit switch, which I think is really net loss for them as far as working proof of work algorithms. Because moving from one chain to another, you're essentially disrupting your probability to block find. At least that's my interpretation of it. And doing so, you're less likely to capture a consistent reward in that regard. So to me, the pool takes on extra risk with the PPS score, and in that they typically charge a higher fee, which, again, is up to the pool operator and the willingness of the user to accept that.
Back to the show in a moment. If you're thinking about Bitcoin security, you've got to be thinking about the cold card, which you can get from coinkite.com. The cold card is a small little device. It looks like a calculator, and essentially it can store the private keys for your Bitcoin, and it can sign Bitcoin transactions. Now, the really cool part is this can be done with a micro SD card. You don't have to directly plug your cold card in. So you can plug your cold card to the wall using a wall plug and a micro USB cable, and then you use the micro SD card to go back and forth between the cold card and your computer with, say, Spectre Desktop or Sparrow or Electrum. So Coldcard is really versatile. It can be used as part of a single signature setup or as part of a multi-signature setup. So there's lots of options there. Go to coinkite.com and use the code Livera to get a discount when you buy your Coldcard. As Bitcoin number goes up, there's an urgency to upgrade our Bitcoin security and don't just trust custodians and even single signature wallets. Unchained makes it easy to set up multi-signature. So with Unchained, you can bring your own hardware wallets and set up a vault yourself, or they've got a concierge service which is getting very popular now. So they will ship you the hardware wallets, they'll do a video call with you, they'll get you set up, even if you've never held your own private keys before. So this is a great option if you are still on the exchange, or maybe you're on a single signature hardware wallet and you're thinking, okay, it's time to upgrade to multi-signature before this number goes up too high and I'm sitting here on a really large amount of purchasing power just on a single signature wallet. So go to unchained-capital.com/concierge and you'll get $50 off with the promo code Livera. And finally, don't forget your backups. The Cypher Grid is a new product coming from cyphersafe.io. This is a metal seed backup product and it's the best value one in the industry. You get everything you need for $59. It's got 2 stainless steel plates for all 24 seed words, and you can punch in those words using the automatic center punch provided along with this deal. You can lock it with a padlock and you get a tamper-evident seal provided. It's stainless steel hardware, it's fireproof, rust-proof, and waterproof. So make sure you or your loved ones can access your Bitcoins if something happens to you. Consider steel backups as part of your overall Bitcoin security and backups process. So go to cyphersafe.io and use the code Livera to get a discount on yours. Back to the show. So Pavel, do you want to jump in here with a comment or a question?
The comment would be there is a lot of rewarding schemes out there, and obviously people can choose whatever pool they want, but the fee associated with the provided service, especially for PPS pools, it is paid with because the randomness of rewards causes operational troubles. So it has economic value to get the money getting regularly. You can plan much better than you can if your income is, I don't know, this month is 10% of the next month, which can easily happen. So especially PPS schemes are adding value to the miner. And obviously somebody can say, this is not important for me because my case is so that I don't need it. But most of the miners, especially the ones who make a lot of large investments, lending money, the regular payouts are super critical to them. Getting money for mining operations without knowing that by running your miners you will be paid and what amount, it's just crazy for some more economically sensitive people. If it's your money, it's your paid miner, then yeah, obviously in the long term, you can solo mine. There is no fee associated and it should work out. But yeah, it's a playing dice basically.
Yeah, so I think that's the way to think of it. Is it's similar to the variability smoothing aspect, right? That, even if you were a worker working for your boss and that boss is taking on the risk that he might not make a profitable product, but he's paying you regardless. And so I guess maybe it's a similar way here, because it's like you as a miner, let's say I'm a small miner, I've only got a few ASICs, then it really makes sense for me to use that model, because if not, I'm taking on the full risk myself. So I guess maybe that, Ryan, that's where what you were saying is more like, oh, we should have these more, I guess, decentralized idea of smaller pools, but each of those users is bigger such that they can maybe handle the variability and deal with it themselves. But I guess that is part of the trade-off, because you might be a mining operator person who has, you've got electricity to pay. You might be paying for rack space. You might be paying for staff. You might be paying various other admin and operating expenses, or buying new equipment. So would you agree with that kind of summary there, Ryan, or do you disagree with the way I was trying to summarize it there?
Yeah, I have no disagreement with that at all. As far as, score in relation to that, it's really up to the user to figure out. The importance, looking at industrial or enterprise type miners, some have boards of directors. Others are just, a group of guys that are, sort of in a, company or maybe a collective or something like that. And, they work hard to, do what you guys described is secure their equipment, secure their power rates. You got to pay electricity and internet and, any other bills associated with most businesses as well. So having, I think, a regular payout system is, it's captivating.
Yeah.
I won't disagree there. Do I think that it's getting, and I think that's the direction we're pursuing with Laurentia, is really getting back to actual network mining, even if that is, solo PPLNS, SPLNS. I think those score rates are very, I guess I'm lacking some of the verbiage I'm looking for. But those score rates are, intuitive to how Bitcoin network operates and, propagating block finds and the probability of. So when people, I think I had somebody talk about, a large gap in block find for a pool. And I was just saying, well, how many block finds did they find previously? And so we went through their history and looked at their hash rate and basically saw that they were, quote, ahead of schedule, end quote. So the probability that they're going to have a, 12-hour gap between a block find is something that, is just math. You can expect to, have your reward within X amount of time.
Okay. So Ryan, can you give us an idea, maybe obviously things move around and so on, but as we speak today, August 2021, roughly how big does a miner need to be for it to make sense for them to join Laurentia pool as opposed to, SlushPool or some other pool, like a PPS pool?
Well, based on our organization, it really depends on the other peers in our pool. So looking at the other users. So let's say, I think right now our commitment total is about 40 pentahash. So if we were to get a large miner come in, obviously the average we would need to hit a specific cadence would change for, the benefit of the pool. And then the reverse would be true. So a larger commitment, or a smaller commitment, would increase that average for the remaining of spaces opening. As far as, organizing the group, what I look to achieve is entry at a specific cadence that works for people. So looking at like a 5-day, 10-day cadence, specifically around your difficulty adjustments, is what I'm looking for to bring a group in. I don't want to bring people in and, not be able to set that expectation for them. And then, still provide the caveat that, there could be a gap. Let's say we had 700 pentahertz online, we could approximate maybe a block find per day. So if that cadence sort of extended, we could, speculate and calculate really that we'll be due for a block soon, and then likely our next block would come quicker because of, the gap in the probability.
Okay. And so I guess the idea in your vision then is that there'd be maybe more people who are, let's say, ideologically motivated to quote unquote maintain the decentralization of mining, such that there were lots of Laurentia pools out there and have, I guess, more smaller pools. And I guess I'm trying to understand your view. Is that essentially what you're trying to get at? Is that the idea you're going for?
I think you're close there. So again, pool dispersion, I think, will help decentralization. If it's us using, cons code over and over again, I don't see that as really, decentralizing when we look at text selection and things like that, because we're going to pull the highest fees possible. Likely, if we, put our code on another server, the text templates are going to be similar or, very similar. So as far as
is it a problem? I mean, let's imagine that there are some fees in the mempool, right? Because people are just trying to send money. And if transaction propagation in the Bitcoin network is efficient, then everybody in the world should basically see all the same transactions. Because once you send your transaction to the network, the nodes are just relaying the transaction to everybody. So all the miners, modulo private transactions, are seeing the same space. So it should be very natural that if you are trying to optimize your output, the value of block, because it's economically making sense, then all the miners should make basically the same decisions. Everybody should build the same block. So like difference between one block and another block for different pools doesn't make a lot of economical sense. The incentive for doing this is not there. The key concept, I think, here is you don't want one person to control and force everybody to use this block, but you can collectively decide this is the best block for me, because if I am the person who is finding it, then I'm getting the money, and I'm maximizing my output. And you can do the same decision, and if you win, it's your money. If I win, it's my money. But we can still mine the same block. Everybody can do
absolutely.
it, and it's perfectly fine, right?
Perfectly fine. But yeah, my point was towards decentralization of text selection. So I guess, assumption with Stratum v2 is the miner themselves would get to choose versus the pool. So us sort of dispersing pools all over, I don't think is not really a decentralization, I guess, directive for us. So we don't really market ourselves as a decentralized pool, mostly moving hash rate from these larger pools that have, 19 EH is sort of our goal there.
So it sounds a bit interesting. I mean, to me, I'm not quite clear myself, because it sounds like you're saying you're not necessarily pro decentralization of pools, but you want essentially less large pools and more small ones.
I would prefer it. It's really not. I mean, that's my preference, to see better distribution of hash rate globally. But again, for us to distribute pools alone would be, again, not very decentralized. So looking at all the other
Okay.
pools,
Yeah, because you could be the next big centralized entity, just running 200 servers and just deciding by having a drink together and say, hey, tomorrow we are going to censor this company's transactions, and nobody would be happy with that, obviously, even though
yeah.
you would have to.
Well, we wouldn't do that, but yes, in theory, I would.
Yeah, but the point is, you want to get into a state where this even theoretically cannot happen, or we are as close as possible to not be theoretically possible. And
Yeah, I
the
think
problem is,
as far
yeah.
as decentralizing hash rate, to me, the going back to mining nodes, so putting that into core itself again. So whether you're just using your low power CPU, there's thousands of nodes on our planet that are active and participating. So to have each one of them be a mining node, in my opinion, would be the best for decentralization. Is it going to be profitable? No. Are you going to find a block find? Eventually. But again, the probability is very minute.
Right. But I guess, to the point Pavel was making earlier, it's theoretically possible that, some, say, Laurentia pool has 20 miners on there, and those 20 miners could collectively account for 40% of the hash rate. Like, theoretically, it's possible, right?
Yeah.
60% of the hash rate, you know what I mean? Like, it's theoretically possible.
And that's sort of, we're competition driven internally. So, 18 peers fighting essentially, in a ring. Think of it as like a WWE
Yeah.
mayhem or whatever they call those matches, for the portion of block reward.
I see. Yeah, I see. And so let's talk a little bit about the scalability aspects, because I know the Braiins and SlushPool team put out some tweets and a post talking about some of the scalability aspects of this, saying, well, what happens if the Coinbase transaction gets too large, or it might not work for the smallest miners, or perhaps if that Coinbase transaction was really large, it's the first one in every block, so that means there's less space for non-miner transactions. So I'm wondering, maybe Pavel, do you want to just touch on some of those aspects around scalability and the approach, contrasting the approaches there?
Yeah, sure. Well, we kind of
Address some of them.
went through the topic before. It all depends on the size of the transaction, like the amount you are sending. If you are forced to do the payouts in very frequent manner, maybe every single block you're mining, then and there is a lot of users, which is not the case of Laurentia pools. But yeah, theoretically, if you would like to extend it to larger number of people, then you would be forced to use, I don't know, 1,000 outputs in every single block. And it would just be wasting space because you could otherwise use the same bytes for other people's transactions and being paid by doing so, because this is your main duty as a miner. You're helping other people's transaction to get into blockchain, and you're rewarded by doing so. So yeah, putting a lot of outputs this way, if it's bigger than reasonable, then it's just pure loss, I think. And then some strategy of joining the transactions together, maybe by just sending the payouts less frequently for one single miner. It's a way how to reduce the allocated space in the block. And then obviously there is one aspect which is pretty technical, and it is you as a pool, you're sending the Coinbase to every single miner whenever you're updating the job being mined on. So you have to do it every time when a new block is found. But for optimizing your block value, pools typically send new jobs to miners once in a minute or 30 seconds. And if the Coinbase transaction is large, then you have to send physically all the outputs, the whole Coinbase transaction, to every single ASIC participating in the mining. And it can be a lot of data. It takes a lot of time. If you look at the timings when you try to send this job to, I don't know, 10,000 connections on your server, it can seem very fast on the software level because the buffers in operating systems are just doing their work. But physically on the lines, it takes non-negligible time. And it decreases efficiency of mining because the receiver of the information, the miner, gets the data later and therefore reacts later, and the delay is pure loss. It's
a disadvantage.
It's not mining. So when a new block is found, the distribution of the information is super critical. And once that's why even zero block or zero transaction block mining or empty block mining is happening because of this speed up of distributing the work. It needs to be in one packet, network packet. Then you can do it pretty fast. But once the information is larger, it just takes much longer, and you would have to scale up your operation, use more physical servers so that the connections are more spread around, and then you could push the same information faster. But at the same time, you're on the farm side and you have a lot of connections to the pool. And if every single miner needs to get all the data again and again, then it can be problematic on your downstream connection from your IPS or whatever. And so you would probably use a proxy, but it is a technical discussion. But having this Coinbase large is just loss everywhere. It is it would be great to implement the hack we discussed before, to put it to as a first transactions in the block and use just one hop internally in the block, so that all these outputs would be hidden in the normal transactions. And because miners are getting only Coinbase transactions in the job, this would be like zero cost. Obviously, you would use some space in the block, so the associated price will be there, but not on the mining level. The mining efficiency would be completely perfect. So there are technical problems with the approach. even on the very mining side.
Well, with Khan's code, it's interesting. Of course, he could elaborate more. It maxes out at 100 Coinbase transactions in a block. Obviously, we're not able to scale to that size due to firmware, but propagating the next, I guess, that information really is dependent on, again, the size. So there's, again, no argument there. Our size is still very small with 20 Coinbase transactions
Yeah,
total.
you're definitely not hitting the hard part of the problem if the number is 20.
And then I imagine all pools are using high grade servers and connection speeds. So really, I think latency with us being just a single master node could be an issue depending on location or even your ISP. Satellite has higher latency than fiber or cable would, etc. We've seen pings to our server that are sub 300 milliseconds, even from Australia to the USA, because Khan's in Australia. So these are things we evaluated and we've looked at.
Yeah, but the pings doesn't matter in this setup. If you try to send, let's make some ridiculous example, which is completely out of this world, but let's say you have to put 1 megabyte Coinbase transaction to every single miner. The ping just doesn't matter because you would have to go through sending 1 megabyte to every connection. And what counts is when the last miner gets all the data, then we can argue about averaging the thing. So let's keep the middle connection who gets the data in the middle. This is what should be measured because that's the delay before you start to mine on the new block. And the ping is just an offset. You cannot be faster than your network is, but then all the inefficiencies are adding on top of that. And so everything being the same, it is just smarter to send as less information or as small number of bytes as possible, because otherwise you're offsetting yourself towards worse efficiency. And obviously you can get better servers, but again, if you have better servers, then sending more data is worse than sending less data. So
well, I guess the best way large miners with thousands of these ASICs would be to proxy, and that's sort of something that helps alleviate, because we can help manage everything on our own server, our own end, but really talking with clients and making sure that efficiencies on their side are just as optimal. Especially when working with a Coinbase derived payout.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter because the proxy has the same problem. You have a server which, for example, has 10,000 downstream connections to the miners, one upstream to a pool. So the time to deliver the data from pool to the proxy is, let's say, the ping side, the ping time. No efficiency loss. But then the server being in the middle needs to distribute the larger amount of data to every single connection as well. So you're paying the price on the local network. And okay, it's maybe 100 megabytes lane, but there is a switch somewhere. There is one server needing to go through all the connections. Maybe you can use 2 proxies, but whatever. Once you have 10,000 of machines, it just takes some time to distribute the information, even on the CPU level. But yeah, these are maybe differences which people are not counting and not evaluating properly. But the point I'm trying to make is it is always better to not use the bandwidth if you don't have to, because it's faster and you can measure even the efficiencies there. It can be one good example. People are sometimes arguing about pool fee differences, which are smaller than inefficiency caused by wrong network setup and wrong proxy. But people just don't look at these things because it's super easy to point to a pool fee or some other fee. It's visible number. It's very simple to understand, but a kind of frustration going out of me. Sorry.
Yeah, but it's an interesting point, Pavel. Ryan, do you have a response, or do you have any question there?
Yeah, I guess Pavel got interrupted a little bit there, but yeah, as far as connection, I can't argue that speed is going to win, but again, the probability of consecutive block finds within just a matter of seconds for a pool is extremely low. Within minutes, obviously we've seen it happen before. But as far as transferring data, that's something I think every pool works hard to make efficient on their end.
Yeah, maybe for one comment for people to understand, mining doesn't have memory, meaning it's the same thing to the first second when you start to mine is exactly the same as the second second. You are not having bigger chance of finding a block the longer you're mining. Your probabilities are still the same. So for example, if you start now, the chance of you finding a block within the next 10 minutes is exactly the same as if you mine the 10 minutes, not find the block, and you're trying for another 10 minutes. It's it's crazy because it's completely non-intuitive, but it works this way. So the first second has the same importance as the second second or the last second. So even once let's imagine we have 1 second delay at the beginning. It is 1/600th of typical block time. So you're losing 1 in 600 seconds in the whole process, and the price you're paying is exactly in this proportion, no matter if it's first or last second. So yeah, there is not a lot of blocks found within first second, but the statistics just work. It's the same as saying you're not seeing a lot of blocks being found exactly in 2000 seconds or third second. It's a similar thing. Yeah, because there is a lot of seconds in the first time that there is obviously some distribution for them, and the first second is better than the 300 seconds. But yeah, the timing, you cannot go around the maths behind mining, basically.
Yeah, I think that's a good point there. Also, are there any other things that start to break down as, say, the price or the sats per byte rises? So, as an example, I mean, as we speak today, the price is what, 45,000 or 46,000, something in that range. And if I look at mempool.space, the price to get into the next block is 8 sats per V byte. So that's like an average transaction fee today for next block confirmation is about 50 cents. But I could imagine if, let's say the price was 10x, the price goes to 450,000, and instead of paying 8 sats per byte, you're now paying 80 sats per byte. And well, at that point, if we're hitting a 10 and a 10x, we're now talking about, well, it could be $50 transaction, or who knows, $500 transaction someday. Does anything break down?
Let's have these problems.
Good problems for
But what?
Yeah, I would love to work on the problem being that it is 10x, and we have to solve the possibly second layer. And a lot of super smart guys are working on the problem for a long time, and I'm keeping all my fingers crossed for any progress in this area. But it would be great problems to have, right?
Of course.
I think it's,
Ryan,
as far
anything
as
to
block
add there on
space,
that idea?
you're looking at, the larger transactions are going to, I guess, weigh more, so to speak. So likely you're going to have more competitiveness with, I guess, your general users competing for, that block space through their text fees. And it's really like we were just laughing about. It's a great problem for miners. We're happy to help solve that. But they're, Taproot, SegWit, things like that, reduce the size of transactions. I think we'll see more innovations in that regard on layer one. Looking at layer two, I think as much as it's matured, it's still not quite there when looking at pulling, a full block subsidy to a Lightning Network wallet. We'll get there. There's creative people like
And while we're on this,
Pav here that solve these problems and have the know-how and the intuition as well to solve these things. So
yeah. And Pavel, I'm curious while we're here. You mentioned earlier that you had explored the idea of lightning payouts for miners. Could you offer a comment for us or explanation, analysis there on feasibility of this? Because I know, for example, I think NiceHash does already do this, but could you offer your thoughts?
Yeah, one of the troubles associated with this is payouts are one way. Pool never gets money, right? So, and the most efficient way how to use second layer solutions is if you allow people to send
In and
money
out.
both directions.
Yeah, clever.
So that you can use the channel for like infinite time. So the idea was, let's pre-commit or commit some coins to a miner for payout channel, and let the miner spend the coins through us as a hub, so that they can pay with the money being in the channel, and we can then send them back to the other side of the channel, and this could work for a long time. But it's feasible, but it's feasible for small miners using the money for like paying. Once there is no backflow, it doesn't work, because it would be better just to send the money directly. It's costlier to make the channel, and it needs to be like closed by other transaction and so on and so on. So once there is a miner who would like to use the coins for paying for coffee or whatever, then this could work, because we will always keep your wallet full. If you mine and use it, and it's great idea, but it's kind of niche.
But I could also imagine, let's say maybe there's a synergy there for a mining pool operator to also be a Lightning hub, right? To also be like a routing node, and maybe longer term that would kind of make sense, because then they're doing the payouts to their miners who are operating on that pool, and then those miners, and again, this is a long-term thing. Maybe in the long term, those miners might be in turn paying their expenses with Lightning. And so then, because it's coming through, through the, let's say, SlushPool, if SlushPool was a Lightning routing node as well as a mining pool operator, then maybe that model, but it's a time thing, and maybe we need to sort of close the loop there for people to be able to earn sats from mining and then spend their sats directly through the Lightning network.
Yeah, we could even like just open a channel with payout instead of doing directly payout on chain, so that there is an availability of using the money within the second layer, but it can be limited. Maybe we will just keep, I don't know, 0.01 Bitcoin in such a channel, and just do it once, and once the user
is going back and forward, then
So there are options, and I guess somebody will do it. We definitely looked into the idea, but never prioritized the idea into being worked on, really.
Yeah. And it is still early days, so it's not, it might not be feasible right now.
I'm keeping fingers crossed for somebody doing it. I think it would be interesting PR for the second layer, especially if some like well-known pool does it, and some prominent users visible would use it and say, so it would be nice, but it's difficult to put money on marketing projects only.
Yeah, of course. Ryan, any comments from your side there? How does, any comments from your side?
Yeah, with Lightning, I think it sort of opens that gate for, that smaller miner to receive, maybe that daily payout sort of thing. So to me, it's really intriguing. I think for adoption poolside, there's obviously a lot of work to be done. My other point with the Lightning, you're also removing transactions from the main network besides the channel opening and closing. So, as far as, helping keeping blocks full, in the future. I hope that's a problem, we never have to really discuss, but maybe game theory, if there's a lot of L2, how does that look, when people are viewing mempool, so to speak?
Yeah, I guess my perspective on that is we are still so extremely early that we just haven't hit the big numbers yet. I mean, you might have seen those projections of 1 billion Bitcoin holders in 5 years' time or something like that. If we were really to hit those kinds of numbers, even just the channel open and close for all of those people would just be more than enough block space demand to provide that, call it reserve demand or baseline, if you will, and add in all the people who are doing coin joins because they want to do multiple rounds of coin joins. That's another base level demand for block space. I personally, I'm not worried. I think, and then also it's not just channel open and close. There will be periodic rebalance or swap in and swap out. There'll be all sorts of things like that. So I'm personally not too worried there. I think it's additive to the Bitcoin network, even if it superficially looks like it's taking transactions off the chain. It just dramatically improves the overall value of using Bitcoin because now you can use it fast and cheap and all of these fancy things once you're in the Lightning world.
I've been I guess a Lightning user for quite a while, so operated a few nodes myself, and I really hope it, I think we all hope it develops more, and it would be interesting to see pool side how it could be utilized in the future for sure.
All right, well, I think those are probably the key questions I had. I think we've sort of discussed where we agree, disagree. Do you guys have any other comments or any areas you wanted to bring up, any topics you wanted to bring up?
Nothing particular. I think we went through a lot of different points. Yeah.
Okay, I think we've spoken out most of those points.
Well, I think most of the points we were looking to cover are, we did that. I think just to sort of relay, as far as scaling, there's only so much we can do with, that firmware software that maybe not necessarily from Braiins and their OS, but from others that are producing it, and is the sort of my biggest concern is anytime you're limiting anything, how does that affect the ecosystem? And then smaller pools with the variable payout, it's sort of a big topic because, there's not a whole lot a small pool can do until they, get that nominal hash rate to really drive their BlockFi cadence.
Right, yeah. And I presume then maybe when a pool is getting started, they might have to just try and offer a discount or try to have their own miners to sort of bootstrap the initial hash rate to get it to a certain size. But yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough job. You have to have a lot of great connections and a lot of money if you would like to start from scratch. Even providing some benefits, the capital needed for it is super large, and I would think there is a better way how to spend the money you would have to have in mining, just being a miner and actually get the coins out of the mining process, like the investment for if you would like to start, I don't know, PPS pool today, and if you run the numbers, the probabilities of going bankrupt, it's terrible. It's just better to use the coins and be miner. Like I would do it myself.
But I mean, you've already got a pool going, so it's different for you.
Yeah, but it's a heritage. It's a luck. I'm super grateful for being in the position, because otherwise it would be almost impossible to get to it without having awful amount of money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess maybe let's have a closing thought from each of you guys on where you think Bitcoin mining should be going in terms of the ethos of Bitcoin and potentially that idea around decentralization, or what kind of ideals you have around Bitcoin mining and what people should be prioritizing when they're thinking about mining. So Ryan, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I think decentralization, I'll probably always use that in quotes because I don't see pooled environment as decentralized. Even our pool, even with a more decentralized payout, it's still a server that someone operates in that aspect. So really driving mining back to the node level, I think, will help in sparking decentralization. Again, it'd be more for ethos than profitability, of course, because essentially there's no censoring a node operator, or a node operator if being censored, by their, government or ISP or, whoever, can hopefully find a way to still contribute to the network. And then mining, thousands of nodes mining, even separately, is going to decentralize the network. And sort of, I think it'll move back to what it was, but pooled mining, as far as profitability, I don't really see that going away for miners, whether they're small scale ASIC users or large industrial enterprise customers.
Yeah. Okay. And Pavel, any comments from you in terms of the direction you want to see Bitcoin mining go?
Yeah, something is what I would like to see, and something what I predict. I don't think we will see smaller miners in larger numbers. It's just inevitable that miners are getting bigger, and they want to use some sort of service, typically some sort of service as pool. So I don't see a lot of change in this direction. But what I hope for is that these miners will understand the role of being a miner and being kind of responsible miner, and trying to understanding that controlling the block space and choosing what transactions will be mined, it is a big topic, and they should think about it and participate whenever there is a possibility. And I hope we will get the V2 or any equivalent of Stratum V2 into production, and decision makers on miner side will understand the importance of this, and we will get to the ideal of one node or one farm, one miner, and not pool, as close as possible by using this kind of protocol or any other alternative, but there is none right now. So I would really hope people will understand and use these features to help decentralize as great as possible, but not on the money level, but on the block space level, which is achievable in my opinion. So whoever is ready to help with pushing V2 or any better alternative, if there is some, I don't know, then please do it. Everybody will be rewarded by the whole Bitcoin space being more secure, more decentralized, and we will remove the argument of big miners being somewhat in a powerful position once we deploy a solution like this.
Yeah.
So everybody would benefit.
Yeah, personally, I'd love to see more and more people get into Stratum V2. So, Pavel, people who want to find out more about you and Braiins and SlushPool and obviously Stratum V2, how can they find you guys online?
I guess SlushPool.com team or something, or Twitter.
All right, I'll include the links in the show notes there.
Braiins.com.
Yeah, and that's with two I's, so people are clear. That's two I's there.
Yeah.
And Ryan, where can people find you and Laurentia Pool?
LaurentiaPool.org. You can contact me through, I guess Twitter and Telegram I use quite often. Mindfarmby.com, obviously, is my main project, right now, sourcing all this equipment for all these, ASIC users from 1 to 1,000. But yeah, pretty easy to find me. You can probably knock on my door if you wanted to, but
do you have a good coffee?
I have great coffee. As a young man, I worked many years brewing coffee, so I'm big snob.
Awesome.
Yeah,
awesome.
If we ever get together, I'll throw together.
Then it's very much appreciated to have an invitation.
Well, I've enjoyed chatting with you guys, and I hope to meet up sometime at a mining conference or something someday. So thank you for joining me, guys.
Yeah, thanks for your
Pleasure.
chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to speak with you both.
I hope you enjoyed the discussion. Get the show notes at stephanlivera.com/301. Thanks, and I'll see you in the Citadels.